my technical culture lesson. We're going to start our program.
What did you say?
Okay, my text is Dreyfuss on the call, Washington, D.C.
Okay, my name is Susan Dreyfuss, President and CEO of the Alliance for Strong Families and Communities.
Perfect.
Okay, I think we're ready to get started. We obviously have a very highly technical setup here. We've dialed our first guest in via cell phone. Good afternoon anyway. I'm Shelley Kofler, the news director at Texas Public Radio. I am, and Texas Public Radio also is very, very honored to join the Children's Shelter today for this very important town hall, where we're going to explore one of the most important issues for all of us, and that is protecting and healing our children. We have a little bit of discord in our microphones up here. Let me step over here and see if that helps. I think there are a lot of you in the room today who've spent untold hours, probably most of your professional lives, working to improve the lives and the circumstances of children at risk for physical and emotional abuse or neglect. When our programs are working and our children are being helped, we don't hear much about those programs and we don't hear much about what you're doing. But when things go wrong, we read some of the headlines, as you know. And we've seen many of those headlines recently during the past few months. Special court masters are telling us that there aren't enough foster care providers in Texas and that some children removed from their homes have to sleep in the offices of caseworkers or in motels. We hear that the state has lost track of some potential victims of child abuse. We've learned recently that they've been visited, and many of them haven't, rather, been visited by their caseworkers. Child Protective Service caseworkers are being assigned double the recommended number of cases, so care and attention may at times be falling through the cracks. These are the things we're hearing from special masters who have just rendered a report. We're also hearing that functions within our child welfare system are failing some of our kids. So in the next 90 minutes, we're going to acknowledge that reality, but the experts who are with us today are also going to talk to us about some of the amazing programs that are working, that are improving the situation for our children who are at risk of unspeakable abuse and neglect. So right now, let's just take a minute and applaud all the child care providers in this room and elsewhere who are doing such a great job. Thanks to so many of you who work so very hard. I also want to introduce some of our public officials. We'll be introducing those who are up on the panel today, but in addition to them, the City of San Antonio Mayor Ivy Taylor is with us today. Thank you so much for being here. I believe our Bexar County District Attorney Nicola Hood just walked in. Thank you, Mr. DA. And Bexar County Children's Court Judge Charles Montemayor, I think he might be in the room as well. And if not, I think he's on his way, so thank you to him as well. We're going to begin our conversation today by getting a better picture of the national landscape with Susan Dreyfuss, the President and CEO of the Alliance for Strong Families and Communities. It's a network of more than 450 organizations across the country. I mentioned our highly technical connection here by cell phone. Susan is an extremely busy woman traveling across the country to do her work, and so she's taken a few minutes to join us. I'm going to sit down and speak with Susan about what she has been doing and a report that she's just been working on. A few little facts about her bio, and that is that she has overseen children's programs in 2 states, Washington and Wisconsin, in addition to the work she does now. She has also been a part of a national commission that was put together by Congress, the National Commission to Eliminate Child Abuse and Neglect Fatalities. It produced a very important report earlier this year, and Susan, thank you for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, it works. That's great. So let's just start out by talking a little bit, Susan, about that report and what you learned with respect to the landscape for children.
You bet. So first of all, I just want to do a shout out to the Children's Shelter and Annette Rodriguez, if you don't mind. She's a member of our National Board of Directors, and just really representing, from my perspective, the very best of our sector. When we see ourselves as a sector as more than just providers of programs and services, but agents of change that pull people together, that have conversations just like the one today. I just want to give a shout out to Annette and her team and her board for really representing the best of the nonprofit sector in our country today. So thank you very much. I also just have to give a quick shout out to Judge Specia. He and I go way back, and I think someone I hold in the highest regard. And I got to tell Texas, thank you for your STAR program, which we stole from you when I was in Washington State, as a prototype that we used as we re-envisioned our Medicaid program for children in foster care. So thank you, Texas.
Well, Susan, what you can't see is we have about 140 or 150 people at our gathering during this noon hour. That's a pretty good gathering for people who could be doing something else on this very beautiful day. And they're very anxious to hear about the study that you worked on and some of what you learned. In a conversation we had over the phone, you said the 2-year study determined that about 4 to 8 children die daily of abuse and neglect, and 75% of them are under the age of 3. Can you talk a little bit about that finding?
Sure. So I just want to remind everybody there that more children in our nation will be killed by abuse and neglect this year than will die of childhood cancer. This is a very, very serious issue in our nation, and also that for every 1 child fatality, there are 10 children that experience a near fatality in our country. The other thing that's very important to understand is that this issue hits our African American neighbors much harder, at 2.5 times more than children who are white. And the other thing we found, which was quite surprising to the commission that I had the honor of serving on, was that any call into Child Protective Services, whether it is screened in or screened out, any single call into Child Protective Services is the biggest predictor of a child fatality for children. So those calls matter. And one of the things that we as a commission came to understand is that in many ways we've got a 20th century child protection model of working in a 21st century world, or trying to work in a 21st century world. These are some of the findings that we had. First of all, young children under the age of 3 are the most vulnerable. And yet the earlier we can intervene, because the other thing we found is that 70% of the children who will be killed by abuse and neglect or who experience near fatality, it is for issues of neglect. And I just remind everybody there in the room, we're used to hearing of the worst case stories of horrific child abuse, but neglect, which is oftentimes steeped in issues of inconsistency of housing, lack of access to quality child care, transportation systems that work for families where they're trying to hold down multiple jobs. I'm not making excuses, but I hope that your listeners and those in the audience understand that what we found was the context within which families are living their lives matters a lot. Housing, transportation, access to food, the safety of their neighborhoods, employment, substance abuse, and the opiate epidemic front and center in that, mental health. So many of the things that people alone cannot control for, that are really things that are at a community level, matter a lot in this. So to simply think that if we just, quote unquote, fix the family, we solve for this, we'd be foolhardy on our part, because neglect and the risks for children when there are conditions of neglect are far more than just about parental treatment.
Susan?
The context within which kids live their lives every day matter a lot, and we certainly found that.
Susan,
the other thing that we found is interagency coordination. That it no longer is okay for us to be thinking that we can just send out a singular person into a home to do an investigation and not be looking at it through an interdisciplinary lens. In Colorado, they have both nurses as well as education specialists that go out with Child Protective Services when doing investigations. Law enforcement and the coordination of investigations with law enforcement is critically important. So that was another finding that we had, is that interagency coordination early, not when the case becomes problematic, but very very early on in that abuse and neglect cycle is crucial.
Susan, I'm wondering if you can talk just a little bit further about the nurse-family partnership. I think you mentioned it just a second ago, but you, in our phone call when we chatted earlier, you said that was one of the best solutions, potential solutions that your group identified when they did its study.
Right. Well, what we found, based on evidence, because Congress commissioned us and the president, right, to find out, what really works here. And I don't think it'll probably surprise your audience, but we only found, based on evidence, one thing that has been found to reduce the fatality of children. And I just remind everybody, if as a nation we can reduce the number of children who are killed by abuse and neglect, it will create an inoculating influence across all children who are potentially at risk of abuse and neglect, because the things that you'll do will have an influence across a much wider net of children than just those who would ultimately die from abuse and neglect. And the only thing we found that has evidence is the nurse-family partnership. Again, comprehensive home visiting. We've got places in the country now that are starting to implement nurse-family partnerships prenatally, before the birth of a child, for families who are viewed as potentially having risk factors. And that was the only thing that we found that worked. And the other thing that we found that showed promise was when jurisdictions are using predictive analytics, data analytics. They have integrated data sets, and they're using them in more predictive ways. And the best model we found was in New Zealand. And in Allegheny County in Pennsylvania, they're using that model and bringing it into their child protection system there.
Susan, I also wanted to just ask you to comment on the flow of federal money, the money that comes from Washington into our states. I think there's been some conversation about whether we should allow that money to be used in different ways to make it more flexible. What did your commission find in that regard?
Well, first of all, you're lucky to have such a champion for kids with Representative Doggett. He really gets this. But as somebody that has run 2 child welfare systems in our country, folks, we have a failed federal financing system. It's utterly failed. And thinking that we can just put Band-Aids on it, as we've been trying to do forever, just doesn't work. This soap opera will continue if we don't align the federal financing system with the kind of preventative front-end kind of system that we want, so that kids don't become abused and neglected. And if they do, we're intervening much earlier and much smarter to stop those cycles. So right now, at the federal level, we have almost $4.5 billion that is associated with foster care. So when Texas decides to remove a child from their home, then the federal financing participation kicks in big time with helping your state with those costs to the tune of $4.5 billion nationally. However, there's another 2 pots of money that are for prevention and earlier intervention, and they only amount to less than $750 million. So we have a federal financing system that has basically been pushing us to more of the deep end of the system. And don't get me wrong, very important. We've got to, when kids are abused and neglected, we've got to be there for them. And we've got to be there for them big time. But there's got to be a better balance in the federal participation in perfecting the child protection function and in more prevention and earlier intervention with families when we've got a shot at doing for kids the one thing that they'll tell you more than anything else they want, if they can have it, if they want their family. And we've got a federal financing system that is absolutely, from my perspective, failed and broken and needs to be recreated.
Susan, let me ask you just real quickly before we let you go, because I know you have somewhere to fly off to this afternoon. We have a new administration coming into Washington. I think we probably don't know who is going to be overseeing what at many of the agencies. Do you have any sense of whether there would be an opportunity for this funding issue to come up again so that money might become more flexible when it's siphoned through to the states?
Well, first of all, I just want to say to all the advocates in the room, it's not too late right now. We think there might be a window before the administration comes in. We think there might be a window for this bill to get to the floor. So I'm hoping that everybody there will be contacting their members of Congress about the importance of the Family First Act getting in front of Congress, because it's very important to get that moving from my perspective. But I really do believe that states are going to be very important to this administration. And that's a good thing, because states are incubators of innovation. And shout out again to Texas. You are the first state in the country, the very first state in the country, to have a plan to prevent the fatalities of children. And I can't thank you all enough for that as a former commission member. But I say that only to say states are going to be very important to this administration. And I do believe that child protection in our nation has been a very nonpartisan issue, a very bipartisan issue. And I really do believe that whether Republican or Democrat, we can come together on this issue of child protection in our nation, prevention, earlier intervention, strengthening families, and helping more kids to reach their fullest potential. And I don't think anybody, regardless of political persuasion, disagrees with that. So I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful, whether it's now or it's into this next administration, that we will see something significant moving. But in the meantime, Texas, keep doing what you're doing. Keep the pressure on, keep demonstrating to the rest of the country. And I think that how Texas has been envisioning its system for years is absolutely on target. It's just a question of now getting it done. And I think that's the biggest question that all states are facing right now. We know what we need to do. Now it's just getting serious and doing it at a level of scale, so that all kids can be safe. And when they do need the system is there quickly and responsibly.
Susan, thank you so much. Susan Dreyfuss, the President and CEO of Alliance for Strong Families and Communities. Thank you for joining us from wherever you are today. Okay, we're going to now shift gears a little bit and take a look at what's happening at the state and local level. We have three public officials who are going to join me up front here. I think you know, a lot of you know them, and they have worked at the legislative level, also state agency level, and in the court systems here in Bexar County to address this very important situation. So with my apologies, I'm going to read a very truncated bio for each of them because their bios are very long. They've all done a lot. But as I introduce them, I'd like them to come up and sit down with me up here, and then we'll have a good conversation. Texas Senator Carlos Uresti is with us today. He's a San Antonio native and a lawyer. He served in the Texas legislature almost 20 years, first in the House, now he's in the Texas Senate. He has tried to steer child welfare issues for as long as he's been there. I covered the legislature in 2004 when he was doing this 10 years ago. So he's been at it for a long time. And he's also currently on the Senate's Committee on Health and Human Services. Also with us, Judge Peter Sakai, who oversees Bexar County's 225th District Court, a nationally recognized children's court. Through Judge Sakai's work, Bexar County leads the state in the adoption of foster children. He's also been instrumental in establishing some special courts to address the needs of children and their families. He's going to be talking about that with us this afternoon. And the Honorable John Specia. Judge Specia was one of the state's earliest child welfare attorneys. He then spent nearly 20 years presiding over the Children's Court, where Judge Sakai now presides. While he was there, he helped create specialized services for children, including the Family Drug Treatment Court. And in 2012, Governor Rick Perry tapped Judge Specia for a job that I'm sure was very filled with tension. It was a hard job. They asked him to overhaul Child Protective Services. So he's going to share some of his war stories and his progress that was made at Child Protective Services while he was there. Thank you, gentlemen, all of you, for being here. We're so lucky to have you to share your wisdom and your insight. Let me just start out with this report that came out, I think it was about a week or so ago, from the special masters who were looking at our services for the foster care system in particular, but Child Protective Services, on the order of a judge, Janice Jack, a judge who has said that our system isn't working. Here's what the judge, through her experts, have told us. That caseworkers here are handling about 30 cases when ideally they would handle 14. Recently, about 300 children considered at high risk for abuse or neglect hadn't been seen by caseworkers. So the new state commissioner for Texas Department of Family and Protective Services sent state police out into the communities across the state to find them. There's a shortage of foster needle at all.
Well, first of all, can y'all hear me in the back? Yeah. Okay. I want to thank the Children's Shelter for hosting this event. As I look around, I see a lot of very familiar faces, and it's great to see the new faces as well. But to your point, about 10 years, actually about 12 years ago, when there was a crisis facing Child Protective Services, I called upon these two gentlemen sitting to my right, to your left, to ask them, what do we need to do to try to fix this problem? And we were talking about caseworkers that had caseloads of 75 to 100 cases per caseworker. Turnover rate in Bexar County was 75%. It was ridiculously high. So we've come a long way. We have made a lot of progress, in large part because of the stakeholders that are here. These two gentlemen, our new DA, Nico LaHood. We've created the Blue Ribbon Task Force about 10 years ago as well. It went statewide for several years. Come a long way, but nonetheless, we're still facing some challenges. You still have a large number of children being abused and neglected. I would submit to you that part of that is because, sadly, there are kids being abused and neglected, but also because of the awareness that exists not only statewide, but specifically here at our level, the city's level, San Antonio. We do a wonderful job, I think, of reporting. And so as a result, your numbers are going to go high. At the state level, I can tell you that the state has finally stepped up. When Judge Specia was the commissioner, we worked very closely with regard to not only changing policy, but getting funding as well, and more specifically for prevention services. We heard the speaker talk about that, and it's been one of my top priorities. We were able to get an additional $37 million this last legislative session on top of what we normally fund for prevention. But I'd be the first to tell you we still need to do more. We've come a long way, but we still have some work to do.
Judge Specia, you would be very able to speak to this whole thing. You were there when Judge Janice Jack was looking at the system. She was trying to determine whether we had a system that needed court-ordered improvements. Do you think we've made some progress, and where do you think we go? Do you think this judge's order is going to propel the state into making changes more quickly?
First of all, we have made significant progress over the years. The legislature in the two sessions where I was commissioner put over $500 million and added 1,500 to 2,000 new staff. So the legislature has continued to put resources into it. Now, Judge Jack's opinion only affects children in the permanent managing conservatorship. So it's a very small part of the system. It's not the whole system. It's children who grow up in the system. It's children that do not find permanency. It's the children with serious mental health needs, special medical needs. And so when you start talking about this court order, you got to be careful. It only addresses one part of the system, a very important part of the system. The Children's Rights Organization who brought the lawsuit has brought the lawsuit against about 30 jurisdictions in the United States, and many of these jurisdictions are still under court order and really don't do a better job than we do. So I think that the court order is an impetus for change, but it's not like no change has been happening. There is no silver bullet. Judge Jacks will not find a silver bullet. We've been working on these issues since before 2004, and we're heading the right direction. So the state admits we need to do a better job with these children in permanent managing conservatorship. The state admits that we need greater capacity. One of the problems with capacity is our society has changed dramatically. There are few two-parent homes where one of the people stays home and is available to do foster care. And so as much as the Children's Shelter and Pathways and folks are recruiting, we're having trouble finding that, particularly at the current compensation rate. really, foster parents are only compensated for room and board and not for the special needs. That has to come in from someplace else. Now, we have this great program, Star Health, that Susan Dreyfuss talked about. Our kids in foster care have better health care than your kids have. Their insurance plan is the best, and it's really good. There's some issues with utilization of that program, because one of the things, Texas is so large, I didn't understand it until I became commissioner. We have 7 million children in Texas. I Googled the other day populations of states. There are only 12 states that have more than 7 million population, not children. Our child population is the largest in the nation, second to California. So we're really dealing with 4, 5, 6 states and so when you look at our problems, a lot of people come into the system and leave quickly and do well. There are significant problems that need to be addressed. Hopefully, the special master's report, the recommendations are good recommendations, but her focus is improve retention and build foster care capacity, if you want to summarize it. We've been working on that, and we're still having a lot of problems.
You mentioned reimbursement for foster care families. Is there any movement to increase that? Is it wholly inadequate? I think that's what I'm hearing you say, that some families couldn't afford to take children because they just can't dig deep enough into their own pocketbooks to pay. Does that sound right?
Foster care is subsidized by the child placement agencies by 20% or more. Mm-hmm. So it's very hard to build capacity when you're saying, give us another 100 beds, but you've got to go out and raise 20%. Now, this is an issue that's known to the legislature, and they are very happy with the partnership with the child placement agencies. But if we want to build capacity, we're going to have to look at completely changing the rate structure, looking at the special needs of the kids. If the child needs a single-parent foster home, then we're going to have to compensate that single-parent foster parent adequately. If that parent needs special training, we're going to have to pay for the training.
I just wanted to ask real quickly, are we taking questions from the audience, Anais? We had talked about having people ask questions on little cards. If we're doing that, we'll keep a few minutes at the end so we can answer your questions. We've heard the new gentleman, Hank Whitman, who's in charge of Family Protective Services now, say he's recommending a $1,000 a month pay increase for caseworkers, which on top of the $1,000, I think you, or did you not increase?
Actually, I did it for 4 counties out in the Midland area.
Oh, I see.
And based on that results, we were able to reduce retention, increase retention by over 50% by paying them $12,000 more a month. What he requested of the legislature was to give a $12,000 raise across the board, and Senator Uresti is intimately familiar with that.
Are we going to be, do you think the legislature will support that, Senator?
Well, I think the legislature realizes that with the turnover rate being that it is, not only Bexar County, but in Dallas-Fort Worth, the turnover rate is 57% amongst caseworkers. We lose 1,500 caseworkers every year that are walking out the door. It costs us $54,000 to train one caseworker a year. So that's $83 million that we're losing every year. I've been saying this for quite a while, and I think the legislature finally is realizing you've got to give our caseworkers a living wage if you want to retain them, and therefore the result is you lower caseloads. So my caseloads aren't going to Peter, it's going to John. That's what's happening, and then they're leaving as well. So I think, and I hope that the legislature is going to receive that recommendation from the new commissioner. We've got to find the money, but it's something that we should have done a long time ago. So I'm hopeful that it's going to happen.
It sounds like what you're saying is that to pay our caseworkers a better wage is actually saving money for the state because we wouldn't have to train as many new caseworkers because of turnover.
Exactly, and more importantly, or just as importantly, I should say, that little child is going to be seen quicker, faster, get the help that he or she needs, and that's the ultimate goal.
I want to shift now to our local courts and what's happening here locally. We'll be talking with Annette Rodriguez a little bit later about what's happening with with organizations that are providers. But I want to talk about what's going on in the courts because both of you gentlemen are rightly recognized as being real innovators, doing things that help the family stay together and that hopefully prevent bad things from happening in the homes. So, Judge Sakai, let me ask you. You took over the children's court from Judge Specia. I think I've got all this down now. And we have a drug court that you oversee, that Judge Specia started, and then now you have an early intervention court as well. Talk a little bit about some of the special programs that you think are working.
Well, thank you, Shelley. Let me also thank Annette Rodriguez for the Children's Shelter and I see all the advocates and the providers and people that work with us in the court system. So let me say thank you for being here. Thank you for your dedication to advocacy. Kind of to give you the state of the situation, state of the children here in Bexar County, is I basically want the community to understand, regardless of the headlines you read or the criticisms at the high levels from Susan Dreyfuss at the national level to the state level that Senator Uresti works with and Commissioner Specia used to work at CPS, I want the public to understand that things are well in Bexar County. Do we still have issues? Yes. I see that we have Judge Charles Montemar in the room, him and Judge Richard Garcia. We have a unique system that Judge Specia created. So we really have a very structured, disciplined court system that can really influence and create the collaborations that are necessary that I'm going to talk about shortly. I also have a new DA, Nicola Hood, that's been a breath of fresh air for this community because basically what we've been able to do is overhaul the court system. And what I want the public to understand is we've looked to help CPS, and I think that's part of the stability for CPS here in Bexar County. What we've done is we've looked at time management as a business practice and principle. We need caseworkers out in the community, not stuck in the courtroom, sitting there waiting to testify because there are these disputes, numerous disputes, because we have basically an adversarial system that requires these caseworkers. We've been very successful about reducing the amount of time to get these caseworkers back out into the community. District Attorney LaHood has really refocused and put child abuse and neglect on the forefront. One of the real shifting paradigms is his focus on criminal prosecution of child abuse and neglect, and he has proposed legislation to enhance penalties so that when these perpetrators come into our children's court, if they are accused of serious bodily injury and death, as you've heard from Susan Dreyfuss, then the criminal courts are going to hold those parents accountable, and ultimately those parents will have to have their day in court, and if they're found guilty and by a jury or judge, then they got to pay their dues. And Mr. LaHood wants to make sure they pay the appropriate dues. Basically, that takes the burden off the CPS court when in the past there has not been a focus on the criminal prosecution, and therefore looking at children's court to try to rehabilitate and work with parents that obviously need to be taken out of the community for the harm and danger they bring to our children and families. Now, getting to the programs. What Judge Specia started over nearly 12 years ago was a drug court, and it was a public-private partnership. And that's one of the uniqueness of Bexar County, and one of the reasons why I say things are well in Bexar County, because the private community, the philanthropists stepped up to give Judge Specia a $1.5 million grant to start the drug court. And what it is a multidisciplinary team approach. What we do is we basically strip away the process that the court system with attorneys and having caseworkers sit. We basically run an intensive program where parents are brought in every other week. They're held accountable, they're drug tested, but we have a wraparound services. I see the numerous providers here in the room that sit with me every 2 weeks, and they have their liaisons, their representatives, and what we do is we problem solve. There's another word that we call these courts, the problem-solving courts. And what we do is we resolve those issues that Susan referred to: transportation, employment, housing, barriers to getting back in because of criminal record, warrants in traffic court. We work all through those issues in order so that people can succeed. Because as you heard, we have these families totally disconnected, especially in the world of neglect. They're usually dropouts, they're illiterate, they got criminal records, they have numerous barriers that we have to work through, and people by themselves generally can't get through because of the bureaucracies. So what drug court does is come up with solutions. We've been highly successful. We have put metrics to this. We see that we have a 1% recidivism, which means if they successfully, not everybody successfully graduates, but if they successfully graduate through a family drug court program, then they get their children back, they're back working, they're paying their taxes, and they're being productive citizens in our community. We now have taken that to the early intervention program, which is say, because of those child fatalities, this is the new court that we just, again, another public-private partnership. I got more money out of the private sector to say, we got to focus on those 0 to 3 children that are most vulnerable to child fatalities, and we got to provide the same wraparound services, and I have the same providers, drug treatment, family violence, mental health access, and we're partnering up. And what we're doing is, with these partnerships and with these collaborations, it's like a field of dreams. People see the success that we bring to our community, and they want to contribute. And that's one of the hopeful programs that we have with Children's Shelter, with their new Hope Center that they got supported by Harvey Najum, a great philanthropist in this community. And we're going to provide more intensive psychiatric services because that's an inherent weaknesses. We can yell and scream at the federal government, we can yell and scream at the state government, but what we have to do is we have to figure out locally is how do we come together and how do we collaborate? Because we can't wait for the federal government to figure it out. We can't wait for the state government to make the decisions to bring the resources down. And that's the reason why I restate Bexar County is well.
How unique and different is it that you would have so much private investment, so much philanthropy? Does this happen in other counties or maybe not?
When I was commissioner, I had 254 counties, but Bexar County shined even then. No, the commitment, Harris County, there's a significant philanthropic commitment, but across the state of Texas, particularly when you get outside the rural areas, there's very little private money that goes into this. And Susan Dreyfuss says is that child abuse and neglect is a public health issue. It's driven by things the CPS can't do anything about. Domestic violence, mental health issues, poverty. Those are the drivers, and those are things CPS can't fix, and those are community issues, and that's why the county and the city have to step up to address the broader problems. That $37 million in prevention money, all state dollars, all GR dollars, because the feds aren't funding prevention, as Susan Dreyfuss said. So this community has a unique philanthropic community that is supporting the nonprofit agencies, supporting the courts. Our United Way has just gotten 2 HOPE grants from the Department of Family and Protective Services. That's the new programming, bringing the community together on prevention issues. So I mean, we are doing well. We need to improve, and there will always be bad cases. But we are going the right direction because we've been working on it for about 14 or 15 years.
I'm just very curious. So parents are coming into the drug court who have substance abuse problems. Judge Sakai was telling me about a woman who had 13 children who had her biological kids all removed from her home, and how you're now trying to work with her. How successful?
Well,
I mean, is 10%, is that a good rate? Or
What it is that example I gave Shelley was the example I said we have to stop and keep doing the same thing over and over. I think that's the definition of insanity. And so basically what I saw was the same parents coming back into our court for the same reasons. And the system, for whatever reason, was unable to assist and empower these parents. So all we did was take away the children, put them in a foster care system that a judge has said is flawed. And then we expect that, okay, we've done our job and we're done. And then we see the foster children age out and become part of the homeless population. Or they take our spaces in the Bexar County Jail, which Nicola Hood has to take responsibility for. And so basically I said we need to stop and do what's basically, and this is something I learned from Judge Specia a long, long time ago, is what's called restorative justice. Can the court system create a system where it can create these partnerships? Because the court system itself, I can order people to do whatever, but people need to be connected with service. People need to be connected with the right service. We need to have providers that have evidence-based programs, such as children's shelters, Compadre and Compadre, with his fatherhood program, which I consider one of the best in the community, if not the nation. We also have an outstanding domestic violence program, because this is unique for Bexar County. The domestic violence advocate through Martha Pelaez and Family Violence Prevention Service have teamed with CPS to deal with domestic violence through its BIP programs, Batters Intervention Prevention programs. We're one of the very few jurisdictions that address family violence in that intensive way. We don't just send people to anger management and expect them to change their culture and deal with the culture that they deal with of control and anger, which is what domestic violence is all about. And it's not people just getting upset and having a bad day. And so these intensive services are needed, and that's the reason why when I said, you know what, let's look at this mom. Has anybody ever tried to help her? Or is it the same, I believe Nicola Hood makes it real clear, in our criminal justice system, we just can't lock people up and expect to have a healthy community. We need to restore people, empower people, and that's what the drug courts have been done for 12 years that Judge Specia started, and I'm continuing, and that's what we hope to accomplish with early intervention. Now, I can't guarantee success for somebody that's been through the system 13 times, but we're going to try.
But if passion counts for something, I'd say you're on the right track. I don't know whether we're going to be able to take questions from the audience. I don't know whether anybody's collecting them, but if we might have time for one or two here. If we're not collecting them on paper, we could pass a microphone to somebody. Okay, we will have a question. While we're getting a few questions from our audience, let me just quickly go around, starting maybe with Senator Uresti. What, if there's one silver bullet or one thing that you think could absolutely improve the system, improve our care for these children, where would you focus your energy?
Well, that's a tough question. I would say prevention. I think that's the key. The earlier, the better. There's no question. And we heard about the nurse-family partnership. Clearly that works. When you send that young mom home with a nurse to teach her how to take care of not only her, but the father as well, how to take care of that baby. That little baby's crying because she's hungry, not because she wants you to get angry at her, or she's got an earache, or she's teething. You know, things that all of us know about, but perhaps that 15-year-old teenage mom doesn't, because she's still a young lady herself. So I think prevention is the key. I'm glad we're doing more, but when we're spending over $2 billion on DFPS, which is a good thing, of course, but only 2 or 3% on prevention, it's just not going to ever work.
Want to change the math a little bit.
Exactly.
Okay, just
My silver bullet is introspective. We got to break the silos. We got to break down the bureaucracies. You know, it can't be the federal problem, it can't be a state problem, it can't be a county problem, it can't be a city problem. It is our problem. And we all must break down our silos. We must communicate and collaborate. We must share our limited resources, because we do have limited resources. And so it is going to be a priority. And one thing I do ask of our child advocates is it's up to you to make sure our leadership, our elected officials, understand the priority of children and families in our community.
My one thing is housing for people, young moms. I've read too many cases where children have died in motel rooms. We as a community need to be making sure that Judge Sakai has the resources to find a safe housing for young families, and not have them bouncing from shelter to shelter, and not have them living in very, very bad places. That's the child welfare system. You need to get way beyond that. It's not just the child welfare system. It's the community around and dealing with those problems. People have asked me, what can I do? And what I tell them every time is, number one, take care of your own kids. Number two, look in your family, and is there somebody who needs help? And then number three, after you've done those two things, I got a lot of places you can volunteer. But do those first two things first.
okay, as a list. I have we have two really interesting questions from our audience, so let's see if we can answer some of these before we move to our next panelist. This question comes from one of the people in the audience who says, I have seen videos on social media of adults abusing children put there for the whole world to see. How much work is being put into, and I think she means controlling or regulating social media sites, Facebook and otherwise, so that there's accountability and these images are not out there. Now that's really interesting. Anybody who wants, yeah.
If one of those things comes out, it's reported to the agency, and if you've got a name, it will be investigated. The bigger issues of what's going on with social media, that's way above my pay grade.
Senator Uresti, anything at the legislative level that you can imagine that would hold people accountable and be a preventative effort?
I don't follow social media much. I'm not on Facebook. My campaign is, but I'm not. But I would think, not to throw it to the DA's office, but I'm sure that that's something that they follow as well, that they investigate if they have the information and if it's reported as well. But I know Mr. Lohead has proposed some legislation that Judge Sakai talked about as well to enhance the penalties. Yeah, on Senator Menendez's bill. So I think that's something we can certainly look at as well, to hold those folks accountable, because it doesn't make any sense. If they're posting it on Facebook or wherever, they need to be held accountable. Absolutely.
Another question from an audience member. I think this is for Judge Specia. You spoke about increasing funding, I think is supposed to be in this, for foster care. What about helping grandparents who are raising their grandchildren? Grandparents are able to become foster care parents. However, the 60 hours imposed a hardship to them. I'm not sure I know all the details here, but I think
There are many children in what we call kinship care, where the families are taking care of them without being foster parents. Very, very hard on families. I know that there's going to be a movement to increase funding for kinship care. That's the best place for kids with grandma. There's an awful lot of grandmas taking care of kids that are not known to the system. 2/3 of abused kids aren't known to the system. So we do need to look at providing some help for the where in the system, where the system looks to the kin to take the family, we need to do more than an integration payment. It's what we do right now.
I'm not sure I know what the 60 hours reference is. Does that, I think this was
Well, it's probably 60 hours of training to be a foster parent.
Okay, yes.
And frankly, I won't reduce that. You can be a kinship caregiver, and maybe we can do something, but we need to be very, very, very careful about the people who are foster parents. We need to make sure that we have safe foster parents. And so I understand the sentiment that maybe family members shouldn't have training, but if they're going to be a foster parent with a child placement agency, they've got to go through the training.
Judge Sakai, I think this one's for you or Judge Specia. What % of cases that go through the courts get to be heard in drug court or the other specialty?
Well, at this time, those courts are very intensive, and so percentage-wise, 10% maybe. I really haven't got that figure, especially for early intervention, because we're just rolling that out. But basically, that gives you an idea how big the problem is. Now, let me take it a step bigger than that. We only remove a very small number of children who get reported and validated for child abuse. And so it's like that big funnel. We got all these reporting, and then it gets funneled, and literally it's drops at the bottom of the funnel that come into the court system. And then these problem-solving courts are taking more of those courts. Now, what we're doing locally, and we've been working on, it's what we call the Bexar County Redesign, and it's something I learned from Judge Specia, is to take those principles and practices that we're doing in our drug court and early intervention court and taking it back to children's court and saying, why aren't we doing a better job of reunifying children with their families? And why aren't these families getting the services that CPS has as under contract? And so we're asking some real tough questions of our system. We hold CPS accountable in that regard. And so what we're hoping to do is basically try to, instead of being reactive in a crisis mode and just taking children and then put them into care that is going to be overhauled very shortly, we're saying let's do a better job about putting these families together. I know that that creates discussion about, Judge, these families. I know, but we can't give up on families that live in our community. Otherwise, we're going to continue this divide of it's those people and those people. And I think that's very unhealthy, and I think that's what makes Bexar County unique, is that we have a lot of heart, and what we want to do is the right thing for these children and families, and we're trying to reframe it so that we can put these families back. And if not with the parents, let's put them back with their family members, and that's where the grandparents come in. And that's the reason why I'm dedicated to them, to help them to get some legal services so that they can get court orders. Because CPS, in their way to protect, will put children with their families and then say the children are safe and walk away. And we've got some situations where the grandparents can't get enrollment, can't get aid, can't get any type of assistance because they have no valid court order. Plus, they're subject to a parent coming back saying, well, I want my kid back. And I'm going to court to get my kid back. And these grandparents live in that world. So I'm very sympathetic to their needs, and we're creating a special process, and I haven't had the chance to really talk to that group to say we are doing something for them, and we'll unroll it shortly. It's another initiative locally.
I think we have time for at least one more question. This audience member says, I agree prevention is key. However, once in the system, what can we do to reduce the amount of time kids spend in care?
Well, it's what we're doing with the early intervention. That's part of the incentive for these parents to come in. You commit to sobriety. You commit to services. You commit to deal with the trauma that you suffered. And that's another issue that people don't recognize. The parents that often come into court are on drugs and alcohol, 75, 80%. They've been traumatized as children. Either they've been abused and sexually abused as children or as adults. And they got significant mental health with the mental health system that's very restrictive, and really there's a lot of barriers to getting mental health. People with insurance sometimes have difficulty getting mental health treatment because there's even barriers there. And so what we're doing locally is to try to remove those barriers, and again, to try to put families back together again.
There's a study. If a child has one caseworker, they get out of care very quickly. For every other caseworker, it increases by 2 to 4 months. So improving the retention rate of caseworkers will get children through the system faster.
So the turnover rate is at the heart of a lot of this. Okay, I think we have time for one more. We have a child psychiatrist in our audience who wants to know about special programs. She mentions, for example, at-risk parents, programs that help them find employment. I think employment for childcare or some compensation for childcare that would help. Do we have assistance programs like that are available through the courts or otherwise?
Can I add to that? Not just that, but in exchange for how they're being paid for, they have to sit with an infant mental health specialist and learn how to bond with the child and learn what it's like when the baby's crying, what it
Okay.
means, and actually get trained on how to bond with the baby.
For anybody who couldn't hear that, our audience member said in exchange for child care being provided, they would have to sit with counselors or providers and gain some skills.
And actually learn from an infant specialist.
And learn from an
Well,
infant specialist.
obviously, that's the nurse-family partnership that is being run out of children's shelter. But another dynamic, and I'm kind of opening another door here on another discussion, but I've had discussion with our placement agency, especially with children's shelter, to change the nature of the foster parenting program to where they're not just caretakers waiting to see what happens and then having attachment issues with the children, but becoming fostering mentoring, which means foster parents need to connect with the biological parents. And we've seen that work in our drug court and early intervention court. When they come together, you will see this synergy created by people connecting with the parents that need help. And sometimes it helps the parent realize that they can't parent and they're able to move on. And the children are able to move on because we create this closure. So from that question of, yes, we need services that connect with people as opposed to, I got a contract for services and here's your certificate, good luck, goodbye, and we just check the box, so to speak. And that's where we're trying to get away from, is checking the box and saying, you've checked the box, now you get your kids back. No, what we're looking for, especially in our problem-solving court, is transformation. We need to see people change and become productive and better citizens.
Do you allow the public to come in and watch and observe?
They're welcome every Friday morning.
Instructive for many of us, yeah.
I invite them all.
Okay, Judge Specia, Judge Sakai, Senator Uresti, thank you so very much. Thank you. We thank you for sharing all of this information, very, very informative. While Annette Rodriguez is sitting down, I wanted to just acknowledge that Congressman Doggett was hoping to be part of our program today. He couldn't be here, but he did send a note and ask us to read it. He's been a longtime champion for children, and he joins us in spirit today while he can't be here. He votes in Washington to prevent things from happening that shouldn't happen to children. His San Antonio director, Mary Ellen Valise, I believe, is with us today in the audience. She's waving from the back, Mary Ellen. And in Washington, Congressman Doggett has been trying to get more federal matching resources to encourage Texas to do more to prevent child abuse. And I think you heard us talk about the Family First Prevention. I don't know whether I got the title on that right. Susan talked about it, the judges mentioned it, and it did not pass in Congress the last time. I think he continues to work on that. So thank you, Congressman Doggett.
It passed in the House.
But did not get through the entire process. So we don't know if it's still alive or will be alive, but obviously there's some interest in Washington in reviving it. So now we're going to turn to our local providers, and I just want to introduce Annette Rodriguez. She's the president and CEO of the Children's Shelter, our host for today's event. So thank you to you and your staff, Annette, for putting this program together. Just real briefly, another long resume that I'm going to shorten with my apologies. Annette has dedicated the last 20 years of her professional life to the Texas nonprofit sector, working to improve the lives of vulnerable children and families. She works with families as well. She now leads this organization that serves over 4,500 children and parents in our community each year, providing emergency shelter, residential treatment for children in crisis. The Children's Shelter also helps children find permanent homes through foster care and adoption, and it provides parenting skills to vulnerable families and mental health services to children who have been mistreated. Thank you so much, Annette.
Well, thank you for being here. I'd just like to say we are just one of many providers, and many of them are here in the room today. So I just want to also acknowledge the work that they do, because no one organization does it alone.
You're on the front lines. You see the children when they're removed from their homes. They're brought to your emergency shelter. You follow them through the process quite often, providing other services. Let's just start out with what's working. What's working, and then let's talk further about what you need.
So what's working? I think we heard a lot of the things from Commissioner Specia, Senator Uresti, and Judge Sakai. We've got some great things in Bexar County that are working. Partners coming together, trying to take an integrated approach, and that's one of the things that I'm really proud of when we talk about Bexar County and our partners, is that we are trying to bring systems together. So when we talk about what's working, we've got a great relationship with Child Protective Services. We have a great relationship with most caseworkers and trying to do the best for children. We've got philanthropists who are wanting to make a difference, and so they are providing their resources to help create innovative programs. So for the Children's Shelter, it's like the Hope Center, being able to provide mental health services to children and being able to work with their families as well. So we have lots of great components. We've got resources, we have philanthropists, we have professionals who are trained and committed to providing innovative care through trauma-informed care services. So we're innovative in Bexar County. What's not working, is Judge Sakai mentioned, is that we still have many silos. We haven't come together to truly create an integrated approach, and that's really one of the things that we need to work on. We need to provide tailored services, not cookie-cutter services, to the children that are coming into care, and to the families as well. And so we can only do that when we come together and look at what the community has to offer, where the gaps are, and what our children and families need, and then we can create those programs through our network of providers, so that we're providing a true comprehensive continuum of care through our community, so that we can make a difference.
So we've heard about the volume of children being removed from their homes, and where do we put them, and what do we do, and do we have the services in our community to address each and every need? Are you overwhelmed at the shelter, at the emergency shelter, or can you handle the capacity?
No, we're in a capacity crisis. When you look at the numbers of children that are being removed, in 2015, there was over 7,500 children that were removed from their homes due to abuse, abandonment, and neglect. Mostly neglect. 79% of those were removed because of neglectful supervision. And we talked about foster homes. We don't have enough foster homes who can provide care to these kiddos. And so we're needing to provide quality care. We know that children that come into care they end up with really bad statistics for their life outcomes. We know that if they're a young girl that's in the foster care system, they're 25% more likely to become a teen mother. If they're a boy who enters the foster care system, they're 59% more likely to be arrested as a juvenile. And then we also know that 40% of them will grow up to they themselves either abuse and or neglect their own children. So we know that the system's not working. We know that there's still pieces that need to be fixed. And so when we talk about capacity, we need more foster homes. We need to be able to recruit and retain many more foster families so that we can provide for the number of children that are entering care.
So when you get the call from Child Protective Services, do you have to look around to see if you have room? Do you ever have to say, we're full?
We do. Last year, we turned away 2,700 requests for foster homes.
So what happened with those children?
They have to go to other providers, and for some of them, they may even have to go out of region, and or they may have to enter a residential facility.
So where do we go with this? You mentioned, and we talked just a little bit earlier about the funding only paying, I think the judge said 60%.
Correct.
And so you have to raise the other 40% somewhere to provide the space and the services and the resources needed for these kids. If you had a change in that math, if you got 80%, how far would that get you?
Well, that would be wonderful. Always shooting for 100%. But that's right. That's right. But if you ask me where to put the money, certainly we want quality care, and we need the monies to be able to retain quality foster parents. We need to provide quality training. We know many of our own foster families will tell us that they're taking their own out-of-pocket money and helping supplement for what the children needs. You know, if they want to be in extracurricular activities, they want to do ballet, they want to do different things. Those are things that some of our foster families will pay for. And also there's some medical needs there involved that, there may be some things that children need that our foster parents will pay out of pocket and not hassle with the medical aspect of it, or the medical program. But we do need more money. But also what we need is more prevention, because when you look at what brings children into care, and we talked about 79% of the children that were removed from their homes were removed because of neglectful supervision. And if you drill down on that, we know that about over 60% of those children were removed because parents had substance abuse issues. We know that over 30% of those also had mental health issues, and it's not being treated. So if we could make a difference, it depends on which system you want to work on. We want to work on the foster care system. We want to fix that, and that certainly needs to be fixed. But if we want to prevent children from having to come into the foster care system at all, then we have to drill down on some of these community issues and these society issues, and we have to put money in prevention or family preservation, and we're going to have to look at substance abuse issues and mental health issues and access to our families.
So are those programs in place and just need to have greater resources, or do we need to start at the beginning and create programs?
We don't have to start at the beginning. We have some wonderful programs out in our community. We just need the resources to be able to take them to capacity and be able to reach more participants and more families.
I know you're working with families here. Can
Right.
you talk a little bit about the services you provide?
Correct. So we have what we call our family strengthening department. So we do two things there. We're doing prevention. We're working with vulnerable families to keep children out of the system. So that program would be our nurse-family partnership, where we go out into the homes. The mother signs up with the nurse-family partnership program during the time that she's prenatal, and we work with that mother throughout the 2 years, or through the first 2 years of that child's life, making sure that the mom and also the family members that are in that family system recognize that they are that parent's first. They are that child's first teacher. So we want to make sure that child is ready for school. We want to make sure that they're going to all their wellness checks, they're getting their immunizations.
How do you find these children? Through the court system, or is there another way to identify them?
Well, we have great partnerships with our school districts. We have great partnerships with different OBGYNs across the city and other health services, and they get referred to us. We also have a great word of mouth referral base. So as one young lady may come through our program, if she sees somebody down the street or she knows someone in her own family who can benefit from the services, she'll get referred to us as well. We've got 8 nurses, and we've been full for almost the 4 years that we've had the program. We've got 8 great outcomes. That's a prevention program. We also have our iParent program where we're able to work with any parent in Bexar County, also grandparents. And so it doesn't matter if the child's been in the system or if the mom's maybe has had some contact with Child Protective Services. We've got a program where we can ensure that she has the support that she needs, or he, so that the child doesn't have to re-enter the system. And then when you mentioned Judge Sakai mentioned our Compadre Program, which is a program for dads. We do prevention in our Compadre Program, but oftentimes what we're finding is we're doing family reunification there. So dads are coming through our programs, they're being successful, they're graduating, they're giving back to the community, they're able to demonstrate that they can be great fathers again, and so they're regaining custody of their children and/or visitation rights.
I would just mention, I think Annette will have time to answer a few questions if there are any, so jot a note down on a card and we'll pick them up, and we'll try to answer those before we conclude today. So you have a state senator here, and you have 2 judges. What do you need from them, or what can you do with them that maybe isn't being done? And I would note that Senator Uresti is on the Legislative Budget Board. And
Oh, we know that.
And so there may be no senator closer to the piggy bank than Senator Uresti.
Well,
Not to put pressure on you.
You know, we're in Bexar County, the providers that are here, we're lucky on so many fronts. We have great partners, great stakeholders, but we have great representation in our judicial system, but also at the state system. And I have to say, Senator Uresti has been a champion for children for as long as he's been representing us. And so he knows the problem. He gets it. He's not the one we have to worry about. It's so many others across the state. But certainly he's a voice for us. One of the things that I would say, and I was reluctant when we first started talking about redesign and doing the child welfare reform for the state. But I'll tell you, I'll give it.
Talk about what that is. I've read a little bit. There may be a few people who don't know what redesign means. This is about for providers, right?
This is for both the state and for the providers. It's for the entire child welfare system. It's how to improve the foster care system for children. How do we keep children from lingering in the foster care system? How do we ensure that they're getting the health care that they need when they need it? Ensure that they're successful and that they don't become a statistic. So it's looking at every aspect of the child welfare system, from caseworkers to caseloads to turnover to medical needs for the children, making sure they're placed within their geographic location of where they grew up. And then also looking at the provider side of that. So it's looking at overhauling and just really modifying the entire system. So several years ago, it has to be probably about 14, 15 years ago, a group of both private organizations and also the state came together, and they called it the PPP, so Private Partner Partnership. Private Provider Partnership, yes. And so they came together and they came up with a model of what they thought the foster care system should look like. Fast forward now to where we are today, and we've had a project that's been rolled out in the Fort Worth area under the auspice of ACH, which is a nonprofit organization who's been in their community for over 100 years. And they, in 3 years, have seen some really fantastic successes. And
Is this the program where there's a lead provider, and that lead provider then organizes all the others or oversees the operation of the others?
And that's exactly what it is. And what it does, what that allows us to do is allows us to create tailored services. We're talking about not having cookie cutter services for children and families, but really looking at the strengths of the community and being able to draw on those strengths to create a comprehensive, integrated system of care for children and families who are in the foster care system. And what ACH has been able to do is create a wonderful network, a great partnership partnership with Child Protective Services. They've been able to share data through technology. They've been able to build capacity in recruitment and retention of foster families and also therapeutic foster families. They've also been able to increase accountability. They've got some great data points that they've been able to share with the rest of the community. And they're, you know, we were talking about what all do children and families need. They need workforce employment, or workforce resources. They need to be able to have access to daycare, and they're bringing all of those providers together to truly create a system where children and families can navigate and be successful. And so where I was probably skeptical and reluctant when I first started hearing about how this would work, I see the successes now, and I see that there's hope there. If we can continue that momentum and continue working in that direction across the state of Texas, I do think we can reform the child welfare system.
So I sense that this is kind of a pilot program in Tarrant County in Fort Worth area. Is that something that the Bexar County providers are interested in pulling together?
Well, it's going to be determinant on the state. They need to determine where the next rollouts are going to be. And I think Commissioner Whitman mentioned during one of his last testimonies that he wanted to roll it out in 8 new locations over the next 2 years. We're calling that ambitious, and we say that's ambitious because it takes quite a bit of an investment. So if we look at ACH, in the 3 years that they've been doing the project, they've invested $6 million of their own dollars into this project to make it successful. They are receiving reimbursements from the state, but it doesn't come close to covering what it truly costs to get this started up, get it ready, get it going, and make it successful.
You told me, and I didn't know this, that about 90% of the providers are outside the state agency. They're private, they're nonprofit, they're homes, and you said that the communication isn't what it should be with CPS, with state organizations.
So 90% of the children that are removed, when they're placed with private providers. And so I think sometimes there's a disconnect with some of the legislatures who don't know the complexity of the child welfare system. They don't understand that the children are residing with us and staying with us. And they believe that all the fixes need to happen within DFPS. I do think that we had some great discussions when the PPP came together. That was the public-private partnership that created this model. But I don't feel like those conversations have continued at the length and depth that they should. And so oftentimes providers get marginalized out of those discussions and out of those solutions. And so one of the things that I would like to see is where providers are at the table more often and not just considered a transaction because we're subcontracting with the state, but rather as a partner at the table offering solutions to help provide better outcomes for children and families.
So one of the things we've talked about is not having enough foster care homes. Anything that you've observed that you think would change that equation and be of assistance?
Well, I think we talked about the reimbursement rates. That's certainly important, both for the foster family, but also for the child placing agency, because we incur several costs or many costs. We talked about what it takes to train a caseworker to be a caseworker for Child Protective Services. We have those same costs when it comes to foster families. They need at least a minimum of 60 hours of training, in addition to all the other requirements and regulations that either the state and or the agency themselves might place on the foster families. So if we're looking for quality care and if we want foster families to stay with us for several years and hopefully then move towards becoming a therapeutic foster family, then we're going to have to invest more dollars to help support them and put structures in place so that we're not burning them out. We want to make sure that we've got respite for them. If they're taking some difficult children or not difficult children, but children with difficult behaviors, we want to make sure that we've got networks and supports where they can take some respite and take some time, and then reintroduce the child back into the home. But all of those activities take funds, take resources, they take an investment.
I think we have just a few minutes left. I don't see any questions coming forward, so we do have one. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I wasn't looking far enough to the right here. Okay, this question is about the nurse-family partnership. Why nurses? Why not other specialists such as licensed masters, social workers, or other people with some skills?
You know, one of the things that I think is very, very important is that when you're going to be working with vulnerable families, that you provide evidence-based programs. And when we decided to do the Nurse-Family Partnership Program, we looked at the evidence or the research that had been placed in creating this program. And so the programs may work with licensed master social workers, but what we have seen is that the work that we've done, or the work that Nurse-Family Partnership has done, it's been incredibly successful. We have incredible outcomes with the children and also with the families, and the fact that you're building a long-term relationship is really what makes the difference in helping that mother cross crises and challenges, and help guide them when they're making decisions around their own health and around the health of their children.
Do you see room for other licensed professionals like social workers doing something similar, or do you think that the nursing profession is a unique one?
Well, I think the nursing profession is a unique one. I think families and mothers in particular, they look at nurses and they have that respect for nurses because of the training and the expertise that they bring. But I don't think that it's the only solution. I think there's other wonderful programs out there. I just think that we should use programs that are evidence-based and researched and that we know are going to work. But there's not any one program is going to be a silver bullet for every family.
Another question, what are your plans for LGBTQ youth who are in the child welfare system? How can we improve it for them?
Well, I think what we need to do with that population is just be aware and be sensitive. We were talking about being trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive in our care, and we need to look at the characteristics that each child brings to the families, and what their needs are. And so we need to make sure that when we're matching those children, if we're matching them in a foster home and/or if we're providing services, that we're providing tailored services to what they need. So regardless of how they classify themselves.
Well, Annette, we're coming to the end of the program. Let me just ask you, what have we missed? What do you want to say that we haven't talked about?
I would just say that I'm very hopeful. I think there's some wonderful things happening. I think Bexar County has some wonderful providers. I do think that there's some work to do in truly creating an integrated system of care so that we can continue to move forward. I agree with Judge Sakai that we shouldn't wait for Redesign to get here or for the state to tell us when Redesign is going to get here. I think we should start those conversations so that we have a plan so we can start moving forward, all for the benefit of children and families.
Okay, Annette Rodriguez with the Children's Shelter. Thank you. And let me just acknowledge, if I could, that this program was streamed live today by NOWCastSA. It's going to be archived, I think I'm correct, at NOWCastSA.org. I'm looking at my friend Charlotte Ann over there. She says yes. No. .com. Oh, I'm sorry. NOWCastSA.com. They do a fabulous job, and it was great to share this information with so many people. I also want to thank the Children's Shelter for hosting this event and for allowing Texas Public Radio to be a partner in all of this. Thanks, of course, to the panelists who gave their time today and shared their wisdom. And I think you're going to wrap it up for us.
Great. All right. On behalf of the Children's Shelter and the Board of Trustees, I'd like to thank our distinguished panelists and guests for attending the State of Child Welfare Town Hall. My name is Roxanne Bond, Board Chair for the Children's Shelter. As we move into the next legislative session and inaugurate a newly elected president, this is a reminder as to why what we do matters. The vulnerable populations of children and families we serve each year rely on a comprehensive model of care to address, prevent, and break the cycles of abuse and neglect. Thank you to Texas Public Radio for their partnership in this community dialogue, and for our child welfare advocates and partners for their continued commitment to address the opportunities to help children and families be safe, secure, calm, and well. This concludes our event. Thank you, everyone.